My name is Nancy Gordon. I'm 38 years old. My sister and I grew up side by side, relying on each other after our parents passed away. I always believed I knew her better than anyone else. But 3 months ago, everything I thought I understood about family was shattered. I was lying in an ICU bed in Baton Rouge, tubes in my arms, barely able to move after a car crash. All I needed was 1 hour, just 60 minutes, for my sister to sign urgent legal papers and look me in the eye. I had poured $55,000, every cent I had saved for years, into her dream wedding, yet she never came. She didn't even call. All I heard through the hospital phone was her cold, dismissive voice. "I'm not your servant." She was too busy planning her bachelorette party to care. Those words cut deeper than the pain in my ribs. I had given her everything: my money, my sacrifices, my heart, and she couldn't give me 1 hour when I needed her most. 3 days later, when I finally woke up again, I made a decision I never thought I'd make. What really happened after that moment, I'll tell you. But be ready, because the ending is nothing like what any of us expected. Before I share my story, tell me what time it is where you're watching and which city you're in, so I'll know just how far my story has traveled. This story didn't start in a hospital bed. It began years ago in Baton Rouge, when I was in my mid-20s, taking on the role of parent to my younger sister, Brenda. Our parents were gone, lost to a tragedy I won't dwell on here, and I was all she had. At 18, I put my dreams on hold to make sure Brenda could have hers. I worked double shifts at a local diner, saving every penny to keep us afloat in a cramped apartment near the Mississippi River. Brenda was just a kid then, wide-eyed and full of questions, clinging to me like I was her anchor. We'd stay up late, sprawled on a second-hand couch, talking about her dream to study art and mine to become a lawyer. Those nights felt like promises we made to each other, sealed with laughter and shared secrets. We were a team, or so I thought. I pushed Brenda to chase her dreams, enrolling her in college when she was old enough. I paid her tuition, skipping meals to cover textbooks, believing it was worth it to see her thrive. She'd hug me tight, call me her hero, and I'd smile, exhausted but proud. But when I passed the bar exam and landed a job at a law firm in Baton Rouge, something shifted. Brenda's hugs grew colder. Her eyes lingered on my new suits, my car, my office downtown. She started dropping comments sharp like needles about how I was too busy or too fancy now. I brushed it off, thinking she was just adjusting to my success. Then the requests started. Brenda needed money for a new dress, then a weekend trip to New Orleans. "You're doing so well," she'd say, her voice sweet, but edged with something I couldn't name. I gave her what she asked for: hundreds, then thousands, because I wanted her to be happy. I wanted us to stay close. But each check I wrote felt heavier, like I was buying her affection instead of earning it. She'd take the cash, flash a smile, and disappear for weeks, leaving me to wonder what I'd done wrong. I kept giving, though. I'd spent years raising Brenda, sacrificing my youth to make sure she had a future. Letting go felt like admitting failure. So I ignored the sting of her words when she called my life boring or mocked my long hours at the firm. I told myself it was just a phase, that she'd come around. But the more I gave, the more she demanded. She'd show up at my apartment, eyeing my furniture, hinting at needing a new phone or a better car. I'd hand over the money, hoping it would bridge the gap growing between us. It never did. By the time Brenda graduated college, she wasn't the girl I'd raised anymore. She'd stopped talking about her art, her dreams. Instead, she talked about status designer bags, upscale restaurants, a life I was apparently supposed to fund. I felt like a bank, not a sister. But I couldn't stop. I'd built my world around keeping her safe, keeping us together. Every time I handed her cash, I told myself it was for the bond we used to have, not the one we were becoming. The pressure built quietly. I'd lie awake at night, wondering when Brenda stopped seeing me as her sister and started seeing me as a means to an end. I'd think back to those nights on the couch, her laughter filling the room, and ache for that connection. I kept hoping she'd remember who we were before the envy crept in. I kept hoping she'd look at me and see the sacrifices, not just the success. But hope is a fragile thing, and Brenda was already pulling away, her resentment growing with every dollar I gave. 6 months ago, Brenda walked into our apartment with a sparkling ring. Her face lit up as she waved her hand to the diamond catching the light. "I'm getting married!" she announced, her voice brimming with excitement. She introduced her fiancé, Keith Russell, a venture capitalist who breezed in with a charming smile and promises of a bright future. I congratulated her, happy to see her so thrilled, but something about Keith's polished demeanor set me on edge. Still, I pushed the feeling aside. Brenda deserved this moment, and I wanted to support her. A week later, Brenda sat me down at our kitchen table. "I need your help," she said, her eyes wide with expectation. She wanted me to cover the wedding costs, $40,000 for a ceremony and reception in Baton Rouge. "Keith will pay you back," she insisted, her tone confident. "He's got big deals coming through." I hesitated. My law firm salary was solid, but $40,000 was no small sum. Yet Brenda's pleading look reminded me of the kid I'd raised, the one who'd clung to me after our parents died. I agreed, writing the first check with a mix of pride and unease. Then the plans spiraled. Brenda decided the venue, a charming riverside hall, wasn't grand enough. She booked a historic mansion in Baton Rouge known for hosting elite events, doubling the cost. The simple dress she'd chosen became a custom-made gown flown in from New York. Catering shifted from a local favorite to a celebrity chef from New Orleans. Each change came with a call or text from Brenda, her voice casual but insistent. "It's just a little more," she'd say, as if I wouldn't notice the invoices piling up. By the time she was done, the budget had ballooned to $55,000. I tried to talk to her. "Brenda, this is getting out of hand," I said one evening, spreadsheets open on my laptop. She rolled her eyes, tossing her hair. "You're a lawyer, you can afford it," she replied, her tone sharp. "Besides, Keith's good for it." I wanted to believe her, but Keith was always vague when I asked about his finances. He'd flash a grin, change the subject, or disappear to take a business call. Brenda brushed off my concerns, accusing me of being too cautious. "Relax," she said. "This is my dream wedding." The more I paid, the more entitled Brenda became. She'd send me links to floral arrangements costing thousands, expecting me to nod and write another check. When I suggested cutting back, she'd snap, "You want me to look cheap on my big day?" Her words stung, but I kept signing the checks, telling myself it was for her happiness. I'd spent years giving her everything: college tuition, clothes, trips, hoping it would keep us close. This wedding felt like the ultimate test of that bond. But doubts crept in. Brenda stopped asking how I was doing, stopped thanking me. She'd call only to update me on her latest wedding demands: a string quartet, a custom cake, a photographer from Atlanta. Each request felt like a transaction, not a conversation. I started to wonder if she saw me as her sister or just a blank check. One night, I overheard her on the phone laughing about how she'd gotten me to pay for everything. My heart sank. I'd poured my savings into her dream, but to her, I was just a means to an end. I tried to confront her gently. "Brenda, I'm stretching myself thin here," I said, hoping she'd hear the strain in my voice. She just shrugged. "You're fine," she said, scrolling through her phone. "You always figure it out." Keith, sitting nearby, nodded absently, his eyes on his laptop. I felt invisible, like my sacrifices didn't matter. The wedding was no longer about love or family. It was about Brenda getting what she wanted, no matter the cost to me. By the time the wedding was a month away, I realized the truth. Brenda wasn't just planning a wedding, she was exploiting me. Every dollar I spent widened the gap between us, turning our sisterhood into a ledger of debts she'd never repay. I kept paying, hoping she'd see me again, not just my bank account. But deep down, I knew the bond I'd fought for was slipping away, replaced by her endless demands. As the wedding plans consumed Brenda, her true feelings surfaced. It started small, a jab here and there, but soon her resentment spilled out like ink on a page. One evening, as I sorted case files at home, Brenda lounged on my couch, sipping wine I'd paid for. "You're so boring," she said, her voice cutting. "All you do is work, work, work. Don't you ever have fun?" I froze, my pen hovering over a contract. I'd spent years building my career, and now she was throwing it in my face. I tried to laugh it off, but her words lingered sharp and cold. Her jabs grew bolder. At a Baton Rouge coffee shop, she leaned across the table, smirking. "You're like a robot, always in that stuffy office," she said. "You don't even have a life outside your desk." I bit my tongue, stung by the mockery. I wanted to remind her that my boring job had funded her college, her clothes, her entire lifestyle. But I didn't. I just sipped my coffee, hoping she'd stop. She didn't. Brenda started comparing me to her friends who partied in New Orleans or posted glamorous photos online. "They know how to live," she'd say, her eyes glinting with disdain. Each comment chipped away at me, making me feel like my sacrifices were invisible. Then there was Keith. Her fiancé was charming when he wanted to be, but I noticed how often he was absent. He'd show up for dinner, flash a smile, then vanish, claiming urgent business meetings. Once I asked Brenda where he was during a wedding vendor meeting. "He's closing a deal," she said, waving her hand dismissively. But the excuses piled up: late-night calls, sudden trips, vague answers. I started to wonder what kind of venture capitalist was always too busy to plan his own wedding. I dug a little, asking about his projects. "What exactly does Keith do?" I said one night, keeping my tone light. Brenda's eyes narrowed. "Why do you care?" she snapped. "You're always trying to control everything." That word control hit hard. I wasn't trying to control her. I was trying to protect her. I pressed further, asking if Keith's deals were solid, if he'd shown her any proof of his wealth. "You're such a control freak." Brenda shot back, her voice venomous. "Just because you're a lawyer doesn't mean you get to interrogate my fiancé." I backed off, but the unease grew. Keith's absences weren't just odd, they felt deliberate. I caught glimpses of his phone screen, once filled with cryptic messages about investors. When I mentioned it to Brenda, she laughed it off. "You're paranoid," she said. "He's successful, unlike some people who just push papers all day." Her words burned. I'd given everything to support Brenda, and now she was painting me as some joyless taskmaster. I felt the weight of her envy, not just of my career, but of my stability, my independence. She wanted the spotlight, the glamour, and I was just a backdrop to her show. Yet despite the hurt, I couldn't let go. I kept trying to reach her, to bridge the gap. I'd call to check in, only to hear her complain about my dull life. "You should try living a little," she'd say, her tone dripping with superiority. I'd hang up my chest tight, wondering where my little sister had gone. I tried to salvage what we had. One night, I suggested we go over wedding details together, hoping to find common ground. Brenda showed up with a new designer purse, another expense I'd likely covered, and barely listened as I talked about guest lists. "You're so uptight," she said, rolling her eyes. I swallowed my frustration, reminding myself of the years I'd raised her, the nights we'd laughed together. I didn't want to lose that. So I kept reaching out, inviting her to lunch, sending texts about her plans. Each time she'd brush me off, her responses short and sharp, like I was an inconvenience. The tension was suffocating. Brenda's envy wasn't just words, it was a wall between us. Keith's evasiveness only made it worse. I'd lie awake replaying her insults, his excuses. I felt used, like a prop in their perfect life. But I clung to the hope that we could go back to being sisters, not strangers. I told myself Brenda was stressed, that Keith was busy, that I was overthinking. I kept trying, kept hoping, even as the cracks in our bond grew deeper, threatening to break us apart for good. 5 days before Brenda's wedding, a car crash landed me in the ICU. I don't remember much, just the screech of tires, the jolt of impact, and then darkness. I woke up briefly, my body aching, tubes snaking from my arms, monitors beeping in a Baton Rouge hospital. I couldn't move, much, couldn't speak clearly, and definitely couldn't pick up a phone. The doctors said I'd been lucky, but I didn't feel it. My ribs were bruised, my head throbbed, and I was alone, stuck in a sterile room, while Brenda's big day loomed. A nurse, Marjorie Powell, took charge of my case. She was kind but direct, her voice calm as she explained my condition. I needed someone to sign urgent legal papers, insurance forms, and consent for treatment since I couldn't hold a pen steady. Marjorie offered to call my next of kin. I gave her Brenda's number, assuming my sister would rush to my side. After all, I'd spent years raising her, funding her dreams, even paying for her wedding. Surely she'd spare an hour to help me now. Marjorie stepped out to make the call. I lay there staring at the ceiling, hoping Brenda would show up, maybe even hold my hand. I pictured her worried face, the one I'd seen as a kid, when I'd bandaged her scraped knees. But when Marjorie returned, her expression was tight. I spoke to Brenda. She said, her tone careful. She's busy with her bachelorette party. She said she can't come. I blinked, confused. Can't come? I rasped, my throat dry. Marjorie hesitated, then added. She said, I'm not your servant. She won't sign the papers or visit. The words hit like a punch. I'm not your servant. Brenda, my sister, the one I'd given everything for, couldn't spare an hour. Not for papers, not for me. She was out celebrating, probably laughing with her friends, while I lay broken in a hospital bed. I asked Marjorie to repeat it, thinking I'd misheard. She did, her voice soft but firm, and each word sank deeper. Brenda wasn't just busy, she'd chosen her party over me. I'd poured my savings into her wedding, and she couldn't even pick up a pen for me. I drifted in and out of sleep, the painkillers making everything hazy. But Brenda's words echoed sharp and unrelenting. I thought of all I'd done, working late to pay her tuition, skipping vacations to fund her trips, writing checks for her wedding. And now, when I needed her most, she'd dismissed me like I was nothing. Marjorie stayed by my side, checking my chart, adjusting my IV. I'm sorry, she said quietly, her eyes kind but pitying. I thought she'd come. I nodded, unable to speak. The betrayal cut deeper than the crash. When I finally woke up fully 3 days later, my body ached less, but my heart was heavier. Marjorie sat with me, recounting the call in more detail. Brenda had been curt, almost annoyed, saying she had too much on her plate with the wedding. She sounded like she didn't want to be bothered. Marjorie admitted, her voice tinged with disbelief. I stared at the hospital ceiling, my chest tight. I'd always thought Brenda and I were a team, that our bond was unbreakable. But her refusal to come, her cold words shattered that illusion. I felt like a fool. I'd ignored her envy, her demands, convincing myself it was just a phase. But this wasn't a phase. It was who she'd become. I'd given her everything, and she couldn't give me an hour. The disappointment was crushing, but it was more than that. It was a wake-up call. Brenda didn't see me as her sister anymore, just someone to use when it suited her. I lay there, the monitors beeping softly, and realized I couldn't keep pretending. Something had to change. When I woke up in the ICU 3 days later, I knew I was done. Brenda's refusal to help, her cold words, "I'm not your servant," had shattered something inside me. I wasn't just hurt. I was angry. I'd given her everything, and she couldn't spare an hour. Lying in that hospital bed, my body bruised and my mind racing, I decided I was finished being her ATM. The wedding I'd funded was over. My friend Paula Gray was the only one who called. Her voice came through the phone, warm and steady, pulling me back from the edge. "You're stronger than this," she said. "Don't let Brenda drag you down." Paula didn't sugarcoat things. She knew what I'd been through, how much I'd sacrificed. Her words weren't just comfort, they were a spark. I wasn't going to let Brenda's betrayal define me. I had to take control, starting with the wedding. From my hospital bed, I grabbed my phone and started calling vendors. My hands shook, but my resolve didn't. First, I reached the manager of the historic mansion in Baton Rouge we'd booked for the reception. "I'm canceling the contract," I told him, my voice hoarse but firm. He hesitated, citing deposits, but I explained my situation, barely able to move, betrayed by my sister. He agreed to stop further payments, though the deposit was lost. Next, I called the florist, canceling thousands of dollars in arrangements Brenda had insisted on. The photographer from Atlanta was trickier. He'd already booked flights, but I persuaded him to refund most of the fee. Each call felt like cutting a thread Brenda had tangled around me, but it wasn't enough to just cancel the wedding. My doubts about Keith, Brenda's fiancé, had been simmering for months. His absences, his vague business deals, the way Brenda deflected my questions, it all felt wrong. As a lawyer, I knew how to dig. Still hooked to an IV, I called a colleague at my firm asking for a background check on Keith. "Look into his financials," I said. "Anything public, anything shady." My colleague didn't ask questions. She knew I was serious. Within hours, she emailed me court records and news clippings. Keith was under investigation for financial fraud, shady investment schemes, unpaid debts, even a lawsuit from a former partner. His venture capitalist title was a facade built on lies and other people's money. The truth hit hard. Brenda wasn't just using me. She was tying her future to a con man. Part of me wanted to call her to warn her, but then I remembered her voice through Marjorie dismissing me in my darkest moment. She didn't deserve my protection, not anymore. Instead, I started planning. I wasn't going to let Keith's lies slide, not after everything I'd lost. I asked my colleague to compile a detailed report, dates, names, amounts he'd swindled. I wanted evidence, something undeniable, to show the world who he really was. Every step I took felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. Canceling the wedding wasn't just about money, it was about drawing a line. Brenda had crossed it, and Keith was worse than I'd feared. Paula called again, checking in. "You're doing the right thing," she said when I told her about the cancellations and Keith's record. Her support grounded me, reminding me I wasn't alone. I spent hours in that hospital bed drafting notes, organizing my thoughts. I wasn't just going to expose Keith. I was going to protect myself, my finances, my heart. By the time I was strong enough to sit up, I had a plan. I'd share the truth about Keith, not out of spite, but to make sure no one else fell for his schemes. Brenda might hate me, but I was done carrying her weight. I'd given her my youth, my savings, my trust. Now, I was taking it back. The hospital room felt less like a cage and more like a starting point. I was ready to fight, not just for me, but for the truth. The day before Brenda's wedding, her world fell apart. The vendors I'd canceled pulled out completely, leaving her with no venue, no flowers, no photographer. She'd been counting on my money to hold it all together, but I'd cut the strings. Brenda called me that morning, her voice shaking with panic. "You have to fix this," she pleaded, her words tumbling over each other. "The mansion won't host us." The florist backed out. "Everything's falling apart." She begged me to cover the debts or reinstate the contracts, promising to pay me back somehow. I listened, my phone pressed against my ear in the hospital room, but I felt nothing but resolve. "No, Brenda," I said firmly. "I'm done." She didn't stop. She sent texts, left voicemails, each one more desperate. "You can't do this to me," she said in one message, her voice cracking. "This is my wedding." I didn't respond. For years, I'd jumped every time she asked, but her refusal to help me in the ICU had changed everything. I wasn't her bank anymore, and I wasn't going to let her guilt me into saving her again. Her pleas felt hollow, like another attempt to squeeze me dry. I deleted her messages and focused on what came next. That afternoon, I posted on social media, laying out the truth about Keith. I shared the court records I'd uncovered, his fraud investigations, the lawsuits, the unpaid debts. Keith Russell is not who he claims to be. I wrote, attaching screenshots of legal documents. I didn't name Brenda, but in Baton Rouge, word spreads fast. The post went viral locally, shared by friends, colleagues, even strangers shocked by the scandal. People messaged me stunned that Brenda's charming fiancé was a fraud. I didn't feel triumph, just relief. I'd spent too long protecting her from the truth. Now everyone knew. Keith vanished by evening. Paula called me with the news, her voice calm but pointed. "He's gone," she said. packed a bag and left town from what I hear. Brenda was left alone, drowning in the debt she'd racked up for her dream wedding. The caterer demanded payment for food never served, the dress designer sent invoices for the custom gown, and the photographer refused to refund his travel costs. Brenda had no savings, no plan, and now no fiancé. Paula described her as a wreck, crying in their old apartment, calling vendors who wouldn't budge, begging friends for loans. "She's falling apart," Paula said, not with sympathy, but as a matter of fact. She thought Keith would save her, but he's left her with nothing. I didn't feel sorry for Brenda. Her panic, her debts, her ruined plans, they were the consequences of her choices. She'd used me, dismissed me, and now she was facing the fallout. Paula's call painted a vivid picture: Brenda pacing the apartment, her phone buzzing with creditors, her dreams in tatters. I could imagine her shock, the way she'd always assumed things would work out. But I wasn't going to swoop in. I'd spent years carrying her weight, and I was finally free. The Baton Rouge community buzzed with the news. Old friends reached out asking how I was holding up. They'd seen my post, heard about Brenda's meltdown. Some offered support. Others gossiped, but all agreed Keith's exposure was a bombshell. I stayed quiet, letting the truth speak for itself. I'd done what I needed to protect myself and others from his lies. Brenda's collapse wasn't my responsibility anymore. I'd given her enough chances, and she'd burned them all. 6 months later, I'm sitting in my Baton Rouge office, finally free. I haven't spoken to Brenda since her desperate calls begging for money. I blocked her number, deleted her messages, and cut her out of my life. There's no going back. No reconciliation. The sister I raised is gone, replaced by someone I don't recognize. I used to think family was everything, but I've learned some ties are too toxic to keep. Brenda left Baton Rouge weeks after her wedding collapsed. The community hadn't forgotten her fiancé's scandal or her role in it. Creditors hounded her, and whispers followed her everywhere: grocery stores, coffee shops, even church. Unable to face the judgment, she packed up and moved to another state. I heard she's still struggling, buried under debts she can't pay. I don't know where she is now, and I don't want to. Her choices led her there, not mine. Keith is a ghost. Last I heard, law enforcement was closing in, chasing him across state lines for his financial schemes. He hasn't contacted anyone in Baton Rouge, not even Brenda. His lies unraveled, leaving nothing but a trail of broken promises. I don't care where he ends up. I'm just glad he's out of our lives. I've thrown myself into my work, taking on new cases and rebuilding my strength. Last week, I met Paula for dinner at a quiet spot downtown. We talked about everything but Brenda, my latest case, her new job, the Baton Rouge summer heat. Paula didn't offer comfort or dwell on the past. She was just there, a steady friend. That's enough for me now. I don't need people who take without giving back. This journey taught me hard truths. Setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's survival. Brenda's envy tore us apart, poisoning what we had. I spent years putting her first, only to realize some people will drain you dry if you let them. Now I value the ones who show up, like Paula, who never asked for anything, but gave me clarity when I needed it most. I've learned to protect my peace, to say no without guilt, and to cherish those who truly care. Thank you for following my story. It's been a rough road, but sharing it helps me heal. What do you think about setting boundaries with family? Have you ever had to walk away from someone you love? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear how you navigate these tough choices.